Culloden Moor. The name itself can send a shiver down your spine. It's a place near Inverness, in the Scottish Highlands. This isn't just any piece of land, it's a vast windswept expanse, often grey and brooding under a Scottish sky. You can feel the history here, clinging to the heather and the stones. It's a place where the past isn't really past at all. It whispers on the wind, a constant, sorrowful reminder of a day that changed Scotland forever. Many people visit, drawn by the stories, by the sheer weight of what happened on this ground. They come to remember, to understand, and perhaps to feel something of the profound sadness that permeates the air. This moor holds a significant place in the heart of Scotland and indeed in British history. It was here, on a cold April day in 1746, that the final brutal act of the Jacobite Rising played out. This was more than just a battle, it was the collision of two worlds, two ideologies. On one side, the Jacobites, supporters of Prince Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, fighting to restore his family to the throne. On the other, the government forces, the Redcoats, loyal to King George II. Culloden was the last pitched battle fought on British soil. Its outcome would have devastating consequences for the Highlands and its way of life. The sheer scale of the tragedy that unfolded here is hard to comprehend. In little more than an hour, thousands of men lost their lives. The fighting was savage, desperate, and ultimately one-sided. The dreams of a Stuart restoration, dreams that had fueled rebellions for decades, were extinguished in a storm of musket fire and cannon shot. The government victory was absolute. What followed was a period of brutal repression aimed at dismantling the Highland clan system and crushing any future thoughts of rebellion. The impact of that day resonates even now, centuries later, shaping Scotland's identity and its relationship with its past. Today, Culloden battlefield is a protected site. It's a place of pilgrimage, a memorial, and a deeply atmospheric landscape. The graves of the clansmen are marked by simple stones, stark reminders of the human cost. A tall memorial cairn stands as a silent sentinel watching over the fallen. Visitors often speak of an eerie stillness, a palpable sense of sorrow that hangs heavy in the air. It's a place where the veil between worlds feels thin. Many believe that the echoes of that terrible day linger, not just in memory, but in a more tangible, spectral form. The stories of ghostly encounters are numerous and compelling. The road to Culloden was a long and winding one, paved with hope, ambition, and ultimately, despair. The Jacobite cause had simmered for generations, ever since King James II of England and 7th of Scotland was deposed in 1688. His supporters, the Jacobites, yearned for the return of the Stuart dynasty. Several attempts had been made to reclaim the throne, but none had succeeded. Then, in 1745, Prince Charles Edward Stuart, the young pretender, landed in Scotland. He was young, charismatic, and full of determination. He believed he could rally the Highland clans and march south to victory, reclaiming the crown for his father. Initially, Bonnie Prince Charlie met with surprising success. He raised an army, largely composed of fiercely loyal Highland clansmen. They were skilled warriors, masters of the fearsome Highland charge. They won a significant victory at the Battle of Prestonpans near Edinburgh. This triumph sent shockwaves through the British establishment. The Jacobite army then marched south, deep into England, reaching as far as Derby. London was in a state of panic. It seemed for a fleeting moment that the Stuarts might actually succeed. However, the support they had hoped for in England failed to materialise in significant numbers. Faced with a lack of English Jacobite backing and with large government armies mustering against them, the decision was made. The retreat from Derby was a bitter blow to Jacobite morale. They fell back north, pursued by government forces under the command of the Duke of Cumberland, King George II's son. The winter of 1745–46 was harsh. The Jacobite army, weary and often hungry, fought a series of skirmishes as they retreated. They won another victory at Falkirk Muir, but it wasn't enough to turn the tide decisively. The government forces were better supplied, better equipped, and relentlessly closing in. The stage was being set for a final, decisive confrontation. Both sides knew that the next major engagement could well be the last. As spring approached in 1746, the Jacobite army found itself near Inverness. They were exhausted, short on supplies, and many men had deserted to tend to their crofts. Prince Charles and his commanders were faced with difficult choices. Where should they make their stand? The chosen ground was Drumossie Moor, later to become infamous as Culloden. It was perhaps not the ideal terrain for the Highlanders' traditional fighting style, which relied on a swift, ferocious charge. But time was running out. Cumberland's army was drawing ever closer, ready for a confrontation that would settle the fate of the Stuart claim once and for all. On the eve of the Battle of Culloden, two very different armies prepared to face each other. The Jacobite force, numbering around 5,000 to 6,000 men, was a collection of Highland clans, Lowland Scots, and even some Irish and French contingents. They were bound by loyalty to the Stuart cause, by a desire for a different kind of Britain. Their leader, Bonnie Prince Charlie, was still hopeful, perhaps overly so. However, his troops were in a desperate state. They were poorly fed, many having eaten little for days. They were also exhausted, having undertaken a failed night march the previous evening in an attempt to surprise Cumberland's camp. The conditions for the Jacobites were grim. Many of their best fighting men were absent, having gone off in search of food or to protect their own lands. Their artillery was meagre and outmatched. Their commanders were divided on strategy. Some, like Lord George Murray, a seasoned and capable general, argued against fighting on the open moorland of Culloden. He knew it favoured the government's superior firepower and cavalry. Others, perhaps swayed by the prince's optimism or by a sense of fatalism, felt they had no choice but to stand and fight. The decision was made. They would meet Cumberland's army on this bleak, exposed ground. In stark contrast, the government army, commanded by William Augustus, Duke of Cumberland, was a well-drilled, professional fighting force. They numbered around 8,000 to 9,000 men, including infantry, cavalry, and a powerful artillery train. They were well supplied, well rested, and expertly led. Cumberland was a ruthless and determined commander. He had learned from previous encounters with the Jacobites, particularly the shock of the Highland charge. He had trained his men specifically to counter it, instructing them to bayonet the man to their right in the charging Highland line, rather than the one directly in front. This would prove to be a devastatingly effective tactic. The government soldiers were motivated by a desire to crush the rebellion and secure the Hanoverian succession. They saw the Jacobites as traitors, disturbers of the peace. As dawn broke on April 16, 1746, the two armies drew up their lines. A cold wind swept across the moor, carrying with it a sense of impending doom. The Jacobites, many already weakened by hunger and fatigue, stood waiting. The redcoats, grimly determined, advanced steadily. The air was thick with tension. The fate of a kingdom and the future of the Highlands hung precariously in the balance, ready to be decided by the bloody events of the next hour. The Battle of Culloden began not with the clash of swords, but with the roar of cannons. It was around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The government artillery, superior in number and skill, opened fire on the waiting Jacobite lines. The effect was devastating. The Jacobite cannons, poorly served and inaccurate, offered little effective reply. For what seemed like an eternity, but was likely around 30 minutes to an hour, the Highland clansmen were forced to endure a relentless bombardment. Round shot ploughed through their ranks, causing horrific casualties. Men were torn apart where they stood, their comrades watching in horror. This was not the kind of warfare they were used to. The Jacobite soldiers stood, enduring the cannonade with incredible bravery, but their frustration grew. They were eager to charge, to get to grips with the enemy in hand-to-hand combat, where their ferocity could make a difference. The open, boggy ground, however, made a coordinated advance difficult. The prince and his commanders seemed hesitant, perhaps unsure of the best moment to unleash the charge. This delay under fire was costing them dearly, both in lives and in morale. The longer they waited, the more men fell, and the more the government troops became emboldened by the effectiveness of their artillery. The air filled with smoke, screams, and the smell of gunpowder. The psychological impact of the artillery barrage was immense. For men accustomed to swift, decisive action, standing passively under such a murderous fire was torturous. Some clansmen broke ranks and tried to find cover, while others simply fell where they stood. The ground beneath their feet became slick with blood and mud. The visibility was poor, due to the driving sleet and the smoke from the guns. It was a chaotic and terrifying scene. The Jacobite leaders knew that they could not withstand this bombardment for much longer. The order to charge, the signal for the Highlanders to do what they did best, had to come soon, or the battle would be lost before it truly began. Finally, with their lines battered and their patience exhausted, some of the Jacobite clans on the right flank, particularly the MacDonalds, Atholmen and Camerons, could wait no longer. Whether a formal order was given across the entire line is debated, but a significant portion of the Jacobite army began to surge forward. They advanced into the teeth of the government musketry and grape shot. This was the moment the Highlanders had been waiting for, a chance to close with the enemy. But the ground was against them, and Cumberland's redcoats were ready, drilled and prepared for exactly this moment. The most desperate phase of the battle was about to commence. Section 5. the Highland Charge courage against cold steel. The Highland Charge at Culloden was an act of incredible, almost suicidal bravery. These men, many already wounded or demoralized by the cannon fire, surged forward across the sodden, uneven ground. They faced a hail of musket balls and grape shot from the government lines. The Redcoats were deployed in 3 ranks, allowing them to maintain a near-constant volley of fire. The first rank would fire, then kneel to reload, while the second rank fired, followed by the third. This disciplined firepower cut swathes through the advancing Highlanders before they could even reach the government lines. It was a wall of lead and iron. Despite the horrific casualties, some clansmen did manage to reach the government front lines. They crashed into the Redcoats with ferocious determination, claymores swinging. For a brief, brutal moment, the fighting was hand to hand, a desperate melee of hacking swords and stabbing bayonets. This was where the Highlanders excelled. However, Cumberland's tactics proved lethally effective. His soldiers, trained to bayonet the exposed right side of the Highlander, attacking the man next to them, inflicted terrible wounds. The government lines, though buckled in places, particularly where the regiments like Barrel's and Munro's stood, largely held firm. The sheer weight of numbers and disciplined firepower began to tell. On the Jacobite left flank, the MacDonalds, who traditionally held the right of the line, felt slighted by their positioning. Some say this affected their enthusiasm for the charge. They advanced, but faced particularly difficult, boggy ground and withering fire. They suffered heavily and made little headway against the well-entrenched government troops opposite them. The cohesion of the Jacobite attack began to break down. Pockets of fierce fighting erupted, but there was no sustained breakthrough. The impetus of the charge was lost amidst the smoke, the mud, and the mounting piles of dead and wounded. The hope that the charge would shatter the government army, as it had at Prestonpans, began to fade. The battle was turning into a massacre. The government cavalry, seeing the Jacobite charge falter, began to move on the flanks, threatening to encircle the Highlanders. The Jacobite second line and reserves, if they could even be called that given the state of the army, were unable to effectively support the initial assault. Within a horrifyingly short space of time, perhaps little more than 20 minutes after the charge began, the Jacobite attack was broken. Those Highlanders still able to do so began to fall back, their ranks shattered, their hopes dashed. The field was littered with the bodies of their comrades. The battle was effectively over, but the killing was not. Section 6. Aftermath. A brutal end and a changed land. The defeat of the Jacobite army at Culloden was swift and absolute, but what followed the battle was a period of shocking brutality. The Duke of Cumberland, earning himself the infamous nickname Butcher, gave orders for no quarter to be given to the fleeing Jacobites. This meant that wounded men on the battlefield were systematically killed. Government troops, particularly the cavalry, pursued the retreating Highlanders, cutting them down without mercy. Houses and crofts in the surrounding area, suspected of sheltering fugitives, were burned. It was a grim and bloody end to a campaign that had begun with such high hopes. The days and weeks following Culloden saw a ruthless suppression of the Highlands. Prisoners were executed, transported, or died in terrible conditions in prison hulks. The government was determined to eradicate the Jacobite threat once and for all. Laws were passed to dismantle the traditional Highland way of life. The wearing of tartan and the carrying of weapons were prescribed. The heritable jurisdictions of the clan chiefs were abolished, breaking their power over their clansmen. These measures, combined with economic changes already underway, profoundly altered the social and cultural landscape of the Scottish Highlands forever. The old clan system was effectively destroyed. The impact on the people of the Highlands was devastating. Communities were shattered, families bereaved, and a way of life that had endured for centuries was forcibly ended. The romantic image of the Highland warrior, while potent, could not withstand the might of the modern centralized state. Culloden was more than just a military defeat. It was a cultural catastrophe for Gaelic Scotland. The memory of Butcher Cumberland and the atrocities committed by his troops lingered for generations, fueling a sense of bitterness and loss. The landscape itself seemed to absorb the sorrow and the bloodshed of that terrible spring. The battle and its aftermath left an indelible scar on the Scottish psyche. It became a symbol of heroic, tragic defeat and of the brutal suppression of a distinct culture. The names of the clans who fought and fell at Culloden are remembered with reverence. The battlefield itself became a place heavy with meaning, a site of pilgrimage for those wishing to connect with this pivotal moment in Scotland's story. The echoes of the cannons and the cries of the dying, many believe, never truly faded from that windswept moor. They became part of its very fabric, a haunting reminder of the price of rebellion. Section 7. Echoes in the Mist. The First Whispers of the Fallen. It wasn't long after the blood had dried on Culloden Moor that the stories began. Whispers of strange sights and sounds, of ghostly figures seen wandering the desolate battlefield. Given the sheer number of men who died in such violent and terrifying circumstances, it's perhaps not surprising that the place became associated with the supernatural. The trauma of the battle and the brutal killings that followed seemed to imprint themselves onto the very atmosphere of the moor. Local people living in the shadow of such a monumental tragedy would have been acutely aware of the spirits of the fallen. Their grief and fear would have undoubtedly fueled these early tales. These first hauntings were often simple yet chilling. Shepherds tending their flocks on the moor at dusk might hear the faint sound of bagpipes, a mournful lament carried on the wind with no living piper in sight. Others reported seeing shadowy figures moving amongst the heather, too indistinct to be identified, yet unmistakably human in form. Sometimes the cries of men in pain were said to echo across the empty landscape, particularly on the anniversary of the battle, April 16th. These were not elaborate tales, but rather fleeting, unsettling experiences that suggested the dead of Culloden were not entirely at rest. The conditions on the moor itself likely contributed to these early ghostly encounters. Culloden is often shrouded in mist, especially in the early mornings or late evenings. The play of light and shadow, combined with the natural sounds of the wind and wildlife, could easily trick the eye and ear. A rustling in the heather could sound like a whisper, a fleeting shadow like a spectral figure. However, for those who experienced these phenomena, the explanations were often far more profound. They believed they were witnessing the restless souls of the soldiers who had perished, forever replaying their final, desperate moments. As the years passed, these initial whispers grew into more defined legends. The battlefield became known as a haunted place, a site where the veil between the living and the dead was particularly thin. Families who had lost ancestors at Culloden passed down stories of these ghostly encounters, keeping the memory of the fallen and their spectral presence alive. The moor was not just a historical site, it was a vast, open grave, and the spirits of those buried there, often in mass graves, were said to linger, unable to find peace after such a violent end to their lives. The air itself felt charged with their sorrow. Section 8. Phantoms of the Moor, Encounters with the Other Side. Over the centuries, the ghostly legends of Culloden have become more specific, with certain apparitions and phenomena reported time and again by visitors and locals alike. One of the most enduring and chilling tales is that of the Great Scream, or the Cry of Culloden. This is said to be heard on or around the anniversary of the battle, April 16th. Witnesses describe a terrible collective cry of agony and despair that seems to erupt from the battlefield itself, a sound so horrifying it chills the blood. Some believe it to be the sound of the dying Jacobites in their final moments, an auditory replay of the battle's brutal climax. Another common report is the sighting of phantom soldiers. These apparitions are often described as weary, bloodied Highlanders, sometimes seen wandering aimlessly as if still searching for their comrades or trying to escape the battlefield. Occasionally, redcoat soldiers are also reported, their spectral forms still standing guard or marching in formation. One particularly well-known figure is that of a tall, dark-haired Highlander, often seen near the memorial cairn or among the clan graves. He is said to look forlorn and lost, and some believe him to be the spirit of a clan chief searching for his fallen men. Eyewitness accounts abound, many from perfectly credible individuals who have visited the site. People have reported feeling sudden, inexplicable drops in temperature, even on warm days, particularly around the areas where the fighting was fiercest or where mass graves are located. Others speak of overwhelming feelings of sadness, despair, or even anger, emotions that seem to seep out of the ground itself. Some visitors have claimed to hear the faint sounds of battle, the clash of steel, distant shouts, or the thunder of hooves, when no logical explanation can be found. These experiences often leave people deeply shaken, convinced they have encountered something beyond normal understanding. One particularly vivid account, often shared, tells of a visitor who, while walking near the Well of the Dead, a spot where many wounded Highlanders were said to have sought water and died, saw the clear apparition of a Highlander in full tartan, leaning wearily against a stone. The figure looked so solid, so real, that the visitor initially thought it was a historical reenactor. But as they approached, the figure simply faded away into the thin air. Such encounters, Whether fleeting glimpses or more sustained visions contribute to Culloden's reputation as one of Scotland's most haunted locations, a place where the echoes of history are undeniably loud. Section 9. Culloden's enduring shadow, a legacy that haunts still. Today, Culloden Battlefield is a powerful and poignant place. The National Trust for Scotland now cares for the site, preserving it for future generations and telling the story of what happened here. The Visitor Centre provides historical context explaining the causes, events and consequences of the battle. Yet, beyond the historical facts and figures, there is an undeniable atmosphere that pervades the moor. It's a sense of solemnity, of profound loss. The landscape itself, with its memorial cairn and the simple stones marking the clan graves, speaks volumes without uttering a word. It is a constant, silent tribute to the fallen. The legacy of Culloden is complex. It represents the end of a long series of Jacobite attempts to reclaim the British throne. It marked the beginning of a brutal crackdown on Highland culture. But it also became a symbol of Scottish identity, of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and of a romantic lost cause. The figure of Bonnie Prince Charlie, despite his ultimate failure, remains a compelling character in Scottish folklore. The battle itself has been romanticised and mythologized over the centuries. Yet the grim reality of the slaughter and its aftermath should never be forgotten. This history is palpable when you walk the ground. The haunting presence at Culloden is, for many, an integral part of this legacy, whether one believes in ghosts or not. The stories of spectral soldiers and eerie sounds serve as a potent reminder of the human tragedy that unfolded here. These tales keep the memory of the dead alive in a unique way, ensuring that they are more than just names in a history book. They become living presences, their sorrow and bravery still felt by those who visit them more. The chill that some feel is not just the Scottish weather, it's the chill of history, the lingering echo of lives cut short. Culloden Moor remains a place where the past feels intensely present. The wind that sweeps across the heather seems to carry the whispers of those who fought and died here. It's a landscape saturated with memory, with sorrow, and with the enduring spirit of a people who faced a devastating turning point in their history. The battlefield serves as a stark reminder of the costs of conflict, and the stories of its phantoms ensure that the human element of this historical tragedy continues to resonate, haunting the Scottish consciousness and captivating all who come to stand on that hallowed, blood-soaked ground. The fallen are not forgotten.